Okay, let's try and unpack this. You're maybe heading into a situation could be a big meeting, right? Or a party where you hardly know anyone.
Sure.
Even just, trying to chat with someone in line for coffee, and then bang, that feeling hits you.
Mm-hmm.
Stomach clenches, mind goes blank, you feel your face get hot, and you're just sure everyone's watching it, like, trip over your words.
Yeah.
That real discomfort, the awkwardness, the fear. Have you felt that?
Oh, absolutely. That physical, that mental reaction is incredibly common. It just varies, how intense it is for different people, different situations.
Right.
But it's a really powerful experience. It can definitely shape how you move through the world.
Totally. And today, that's exactly what we're diving deep into, understanding and hopefully navigating social anxiety and social awkwardness. We've gathered quite a bit for this. Insights from self-help guides on shyness and social anxiety. There's a piece from Better Up on overcoming social awkwardness specifically.
Right. Practical stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And another guide rooted in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, plus some research on how effective CBT actually is for anxiety.
So our goal here really is to pull all that together for you. We want to figure out what these things are, look at why the sources suggest they happen, and, maybe most importantly, what keeps them going.
And then the strategies, right.
Exactly. Then get to the practical strategies from these sources, the things that might help you feel, a bit more comfortable, more confident out there.
Perfect. Okay, so let's jump in. We hear social anxiety, we hear social awkwardness. Are they the same thing? Or is there a key difference the sources point out?
Yeah, they do draw a distinction. Social anxiety is generally described as like a more intense level of shyness, a really significant fear of social situations.
Fear of the situation itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Driven by worries about being judged or humiliated or rejected. And when it's severe, it can be genuinely debilitating. It can stop people doing things they want or even need to do, like going to work, college, seeing friends, hobbies.
Right, okay. So social anxiety is that core fear that might make you avoid things. What about social awkwardness then?
Social awkwardness is more about the experience during the interaction, that feeling of difficulty in, communicating smoothly or engaging with people.
Ah, okay.
It might look like not knowing what to say, feeling really uncertain, maybe avoiding eye contact, or showing those physical signs like fidgeting or sweating.
I see. So the anxiety is the underlying fear, which can lead to the awkwardness, which is more about the kind of bumpy interaction.
You got it. The sources definitely say they're often linked. Social awkwardness can be a symptom of social anxiety sometimes.
But not always.
Not always. It can come from other places too. That Better Up article mentions things like maybe extreme introversion or overthinking things a lot, or even just different communication styles like you might see with neurodivergence.
Okay,
The main thing is they're related, but they're not quite the same.
that makes sense. So what are the classic signs then? If you're feeling this or maybe seeing it in someone else, what does it actually look like?
Well, across the board, the sources mention that intense feeling of being anxious or really self-conscious in social settings. There's often this persistent worry about being judged, negatively, or a fear you won't have anything interesting to say.
Right, that nothing to contribute feeling.
Yeah, and a really strong belief that everyone can see how anxious you are,
Yeah.
that your anxiety is super obvious.
Wow, that feeling that everyone's watching and noticing that sounds really tough. What about, like, physical stuff?
Oh, yeah, very common. Things like blushing, sweating, trembling, maybe shaky hands or knees.
Okay.
Sometimes struggling to speak, like
Yeah.
your voice gets shaky or you might stammer a bit. And then internal things too, like your stomach churning, feeling dizzy, heart racing, maybe shortness of breath.
And those physical things probably just make the anxiety worse, right?
Totally. They feed right back into it, becomes a loop.
And what about how people behave?
You often see avoidance. So maybe staying really quiet, trying to just blend in.
Fly under the radar?
Exactly. Or sometimes more subtle things like fidgeting a lot,
Yeah.
having really closed off body language, or maybe just sticking really close to the one person at a party. There are often, ways people try to cope with the discomfort.
Okay, so that paints a pretty clear picture of what it is and how it feels. Now, the big question, why? What do the sources say about the causes? Why do some people struggle with this more?
Well, the consensus seems to be it's usually a mix of factors,
Yes.
rarely just one thing.
Okay.
One angle, which some of the self-help guides really focus on, is behavioral learning. Like, if you had a really bad experience socially, maybe public speaking went horribly wrong, or you felt totally humiliated somewhere,
Yeah.
then negative memory can create this really strong link in your brain. So you start fearing and then avoiding similar situations. It's kind of like, touching a hot stove, you learn pretty quick to stay away.
Right. So a past painful event can kind of echo forward and make you cautious. What about the way we think? Our thought patterns?
Oh, that's huge. That's emphasized everywhere. Certain thinking styles basically set you up to expect bad social outcomes.
How so?
You might just automatically assume everyone's judging you negatively, or you might hold these really ingrained negative beliefs about yourself. I'm boring, I'm just awkward, I never have the right thing to say.
Wow.
These internal predictions and beliefs are incredibly powerful. They can generate anxiety before you even walk into the room.
It's like you're setting yourself up for a hard time before it even starts. Are there, like, evolutionary or biological angles, too?
Some sources do mention that. Evolutionarily, humans are super social, right? So avoiding upsetting others or being kicked out of the group was historically really important for survival.
Makes sense.
So this view suggests people with social anxiety might just be wired to be extra sensitive to potential rejection or negative feedback. They might go to great lengths not to offend anyone.
Huh, interesting. Like an overactive danger signal for social threats.
Kind of. And yeah, there can definitely be a biological component. If social anxiety runs in your close family, there might be a genetic link. You might inherit certain personality traits or sensitivities that make you more prone to it.
Fascinating that it could link back to basic survival stuff or family traits. That Better Up article also brought up things like perfectionism and overthinking.
Right. It made the point that if you set these impossibly high standards for how you should act socially, that's perfectionism, you'll constantly feel like you're falling short.
Yeah, always failing.
And overthinking or ruminating just keeps replaying past interactions, focusing on what went wrong, keeping you stuck in self-criticism.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. And the article also brought up neurodivergence again, pointing out that for some people, the awkwardness might come from navigating social rules that are built around neurotypical communication styles. It's not necessarily about fear of judgment in the same way.
That feels like a really important point. So for some, it's less about fear and more about kind of a communication mismatch with the expected norm.
Exactly. It shifts the focus. It's not that something is wrong with the person, but maybe the environment or expectations aren't a good fit for their natural style.
Okay. So we've got this mix. Past experiences, how we think, maybe biology or evolution, and sometimes just navigating different communication styles. But the sources also seem to say that knowing the original why isn't always the most helpful thing for moving forward.
Precisely. That's a key takeaway. Often, figuring out what keeps it going right now is much more practical for making changes than trying to dig up the absolute root cause from years ago.
Okay, right. Let's get into that then. What are the things that keep this cycle spinning? What fuels it?
Well, a core idea, especially from the CBT approaches, is this interconnected cycle. You have a situation.
Like going to a party.
Right. Then you have thoughts about it. Maybe I'm going to make a fool of myself. That leads to feelings, anxiety, fear, which triggers physical symptoms, heart races, palm sweat. And those symptoms can then spark more unhelpful thoughts. Oh, God, everyone can see I'm sweating.
Yeah.
Which ramps up the feelings even more. And then comes the behavior.
And the behavior is where it gets really sticky.
Absolutely. Two big ones keep the cycle locked. The unhelpful thoughts themselves and avoidance.
Okay.
We already touched on the thoughts, I'm boring, I'm weird. These predictions just kill your confidence and stop you from even trying or from properly engaging when you are in a situation.
Yeah.
And the really powerful insight from the sources is these thoughts are not facts. We act like they are, but they're just our interpretations, often distorted ones.
Just saying that thoughts aren't facts feels like it could make a difference if you really internalize it.
It really can. And then there's avoidance.
Right.
Avoidance is probably the biggest reason people stay stuck. If you're scared of social situations, avoiding them feels like the logical thing to do. And hey, it works short term. You get relief.
Phew, dodge that bullet.
Exactly. But, and this is the crucial bit the sources stress, it stops you ever having an experience that proves your fears wrong. The thing you're avoiding just stays this big, scary monster in your head. And the longer you avoid it, the bigger and scarier it gets.
Wow, yeah. It's a total trap. The thing that helps now makes it worse down the line. What about those little things people do during an interaction to feel safer?
Ah, yes, safety behaviors. Good point. These are things like Staying really quiet, planning out everything you're going to say beforehand.
Like rehearsing lines.
Yeah, exactly. Or avoiding eye contact, maybe sticking to one person you know like glue, wearing tons of makeup to hide blushing, or even using alcohol or drugs to cope.
Okay. They make you feel a bit safer in the moment.
They do. They give you a sense of control, or at least take the edge off temporarily,
But they're bad long term. Why?
because they stop you from finding out you can cope without them. If things go okay, you end up thinking, oh, that only went well because I barely spoke, or because I had those drinks.
I see.
You don't learn that you actually handled it. The credit goes to the safety behavior, not to you.
And don't they sometimes backfire? Like make the feared thing happen?
They absolutely can. That's the self-fulfilling prophecy part.
Yeah.
Classic example. You're scared people think you're boring, so your safety behavior is to stay quiet. But because you're quiet, people might not talk to you much, which then seems to confirm your original fear. See, I am boring. Nobody wants to talk to me. Your safety behavior actually created the outcome you were trying to avoid.
Oh man, that's rough. The irony. Okay, and the last big thing keeping it going is focusing inwards.
Yes, exactly. Increased self-focus. When people get anxious socially, they often turn their attention right inside. They start monitoring themselves intensely. Is my voice shaking? Am I blushing? Can they see my hands trembling?
Like putting a microscope on yourself.
Totally. And the thing is, this intense focus actually makes the physical symptoms worse. And it makes you massively overestimate how much other people notice your anxiety. Key point from the sources.
Yeah.
Your anxiety is usually way less visible than you think it is.
We feel it so strongly inside, we assume it must be obvious on the outside.
Precisely. And all that energy spent monitoring yourself means you're not actually paying attention to the conversation or the people around you, which, guess what? Makes interacting harder. And then that reinforces your negative beliefs about how badly you did. Another loop.
Okay, wow. So we've got the cycle itself, the unhelpful thoughts, the avoidance trap, those tricky safety behaviors, and shining a spotlight on ourselves. That's a lot keeping people stuck. It sounds kind of bleak.
It can feel that way when you lay it all out,
Okay.
but this is actually where the hope comes in.
Okay.
The really good news,
Yeah.
which the sources strongly emphasize, is that because these are learned patterns of funking, patterns of behaving, they can be changed.
Right. They're not fixed personality traits.
Exactly. And approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, are highlighted as being really effective frameworks for making those changes.
Okay, CBT. It focuses on changing thoughts and behaviors. So how does it tackle those unhelpful thoughts first?
It usually starts with learning to actually notice them and then to spot the common patterns they fall into.
Patterns, like what?
Well, the sources list things like mind reading, assuming you know what others are thinking, usually negatively. They think I'm an idiot. Labeling, sticking a negative label on yourself. I'm just incompetent. Predicting the future, being sure things will go badly. This presentation will be a disaster. Personalization, blaming yourself for things that aren't your fault, like an awkward silence. Overgeneralizing, taking one bad experience and assuming all similar ones will be bad. And focusing on the negatives, dwelling only on the bad parts of an interaction.
Oof, I think most of us do some of those sometimes. So once you catch yourself thinking, say they think I'm boring, how do you challenge that effectively? What did the sources suggest?
The core idea is to treat that thought like a hypothesis you need to test, not like a proven fact. You question it by asking yourself specific questions, like, okay, what's the actual evidence against this thought? Is there any evidence for it, and is that evidence solid fact, or just my feeling or assumption? What kind of unhelpful thinking pattern is this? What would my best friend say if I told them this thought? How likely am I to even remember this moment in, say, 6 months? What are the real pros and cons of believing this thought right now? Is there another way to look at this whole situation? Is there something practical I can do instead of just worrying?
It's like cross-examining your own thought.
Exactly. You put it on trial. By going through those questions, you start to see the thought isn't necessarily 100% true. The aim isn't positive thinking, like forcing yourself to believe everyone loves me.
Right, that might feel fake.
Yeah. The aim is to land on a more balanced, more realistic thought.
Sure.
One that sees the situation more clearly without those distortions.
Okay, that makes sense. It's about finding a more helpful perspective. And what about dealing with that intense focus on yourself, the internal monitoring?
Yeah, reducing that self-focus is key because it just fuels the anxiety. The main advice is to consciously shift your attention outwards.
How do you do that?
Instead of tracking your heartbeat or blushing, deliberately focus on the conversation. Really listen to what the other person is saying. Notice their facial expressions, their tone of voice. Look around. Notice details in the room.
Get out of your own head.
Basically, yes. And remind yourself. Feeling anxious doesn't automatically mean you're coming across badly. And people are probably noticing your anxiety way less than you fear.
Right, shift the spotlight off yourself.
Exactly. Other tips include trying not to over-rehearse what you'll say. Just let the conversation flow more naturally. Accepting that silences happen in conversations. They're normal. It's not always your job to fill them.
Oh, that's a good one. The pressure to fill silence.
Yeah. And just aiming to be yourself rather than trying to perform some perfect, super confident version of yourself. That pressure just adds to the anxiety.
Absolutely. Okay, now, avoidance. Facing the things you avoid sounds, well, really hard, but also fundamental.
Yeah.
How do you actually start doing that?
This is where gradual exposure comes in.
Yeah.
And the sources really frame this as probably the most effective long-term strategy.
Okay.
Because avoidance keeps the fear alive, right?
Yeah.
The only way to really shrink the fear is to have experiences that show you, hey, I actually can handle this. Facing the situations builds real evidence and real confidence.
So you don't just jump into your worst nightmare scenario.
No, definitely not. That would likely be too much. The method is to be systematic about it. You build what's called an exposure hierarchy.
Okay, what's that?
You make a list of all the social situations you fear or avoid. Then you rank them based on how much anxiety they cause you, maybe on a scale from 0 to 100.
So asking a stranger for the time might be a 10, but giving a presentation is a 90.
Exactly. And then you start with the easiest one on your list, the lowest number.
Like climbing a ladder, one step at a time.
Perfect analogy. You deliberately put yourself in that lowest ranked situation, and you repeat it regularly, ideally daily, if possible.
Yeah.
You keep doing it until the anxiety you feel in that situation drops significantly.
Okay.
This might take doing it quite a few times. The key is persistence at each step before you move up to the next slightly harder one.
Repeat until it's less scary, then tackle the next rung.
You got it. And for situations that last longer, like going to a party, the sources suggest trying to stay for a decent amount of time, maybe 30, 45 minutes. That gives your anxiety time to naturally peak and then start to come down while you're still in this situation. That's powerful learning.
Ah, so you learn you can ride the wave.
Exactly. For quick interactions like asking a question, repetition is even more important. But, and this is absolutely crucial, you have to do the exposure without using your safety behaviors.
Ah, right. Drop the crutches.
You have to. If you face the situation but you're secretly relying on, say, rehearsing every word or avoiding all eye contact, you won't learn that you can cope. You'll just think the safety behavior got you through.
Yeah. So you really have to commit to facing it fully.
Yes. And if you try an exposure and your anxiety just stays sky high, a really good question to ask yourself is, am I accidentally using a safety behavior here without realizing it?
That's a great self-check. Okay, that provides a really clear path for tackling avoidance. Now, that Better Up article had some other practical tips too, right? More sort of in-the-moment things.
Yeah, and had some really nice, actionable suggestions. One was about leading with curiosity.
How does that help?
Well, if you focus on asking other people questions, genuinely trying to learn about them, it takes the pressure off you to be interesting or perform. Plus, it helps you find common ground. Preparing a couple of open-ended questions beforehand can make it easier.
Smart. What else?
Prioritizing eye contact was another, which can feel hard, but you can practice gradually. Maybe start by just trying to notice the color of the person's eyes or their blinking pattern, little steps. Being mindful of your own body language, too. Noticing if you're fidgeting or turning away, maybe just pick one habit, like trying to keep your shoulders relaxed and work on that.
Small, manageable changes.
Exactly. Active listening is huge. Really focusing on understanding the speaker, showing you're listening with nods or asking follow-up questions, maybe paraphrasing back what they said to check in with, you understood? That keeps you engaged outwardly.
Instead of inwardly focused?
Right. Using relaxation techniques in the moment if you feel overwhelmed. Deep breathing. Grounding yourself by noticing your senses, like what you see, hear, feel.
Like feeling your feet on the floor.
Yeah, that's a classic grounding technique. Also practicing small talk, maybe trying to reframe it not as this horrible chore, but like a little treasure hunt to find topics you can connect on more deeply.
I like that treasure hunt for connection. That changes the feel of it.
Doesn't it? And crucially, across all of this, the article stressed being patient and kind to yourself. Building social skills takes time, like any other skill. Expect setbacks. Don't beat yourself up over awkward moments.
Grant yourself some grace.
Exactly. Actively challenging that negative self-talk we discussed. Maybe replacing it with more balanced or even encouraging thoughts. Positive affirmations can help some people. Recognizing if perfectionism is driving some of the anxiety, realizing your standards might be unrealistically high.
Yeah.
Practicing mindfulness, just generally trying to stay present in the moment instead of getting lost in anxious thoughts about the past or future. And, asking for help. Practicing with trusted friends or family, getting their perspective.
That makes sense. Use your support system.
And it also mentioned seeking professional help, social skills classes, coaching, or seeing a mental health professional as more structured options if you feel stuck.
Good point. Now, what about for people navigating this where neurodivergence is part of the picture? Are the strategies different?
Yeah, that's a critical consideration. As we touched on earlier, if someone is neurodivergent, their challenges in social situations might stem more from differences in communication style or sensory sensitivities or how they process information, rather than primarily from that core fear of negative judgment seen in social anxiety disorder.
Okay.
So while some strategies might still apply, like maybe challenging unhelpful thoughts about social interactions, or gradually exposing yourself to situations that feel overwhelming, the overall emphasis often shifts.
Oh, so.
It becomes less about trying to fix yourself or mask your natural ways of communicating to fit in with neurotypical expectations. It's more about self-acceptance, finding social environments and people where you feel accepted and understood for who you are.
Right.
It's about setting boundaries that respect your needs, maybe managing sensory overload or needing downtime after socializing, and finding authentic ways to connect that actually work for you. The goal is navigating the world comfortably as yourself, not forcing yourself into a mold that doesn't fit.
That self-acceptance piece feels huge, really, whatever the underlying reasons. Okay, so pulling this all together. We've looked at social anxiety and awkwardness not as these fixed things you're stuck with, but more as experiences driven by these patterns, right? Thinking, feeling, behaving.
Exactly. And we've seen that there are concrete strategies, often drawing from CBT, that can help change those patterns. Things like really questioning those unhelpful thoughts that feel so true but maybe aren't.
Thoughts aren't facts.
Right. Gradually facing the situations you've been avoiding step by step and becoming aware of those sneaky safety behaviors or that intense self-focus that actually keep you stuck.
It really does sound like learning skills, like anything else. Playing guitar, learning to cook it takes practice, patience, maybe a framework to follow.
Absolutely. That's a great way to think about it. And the sources really highlight why this matters.
Yeah.
Being able to connect with others comfortably is so fundamental for our relationships, our work, just our general sense of well-being. Getting a better handle on navigating social situations can make a massive difference to your quality of life.
Totally.
And maybe here's a final thought to leave you mulling over, something that comes out of these ideas. How much of the anxiety you feel around social stuff is actually caused by the event itself versus the story you tell yourself about the event? The predictions beforehand, the running commentary during, the mental replays after. If those thoughts aren't necessarily facts, what opens up if you learn to question that story?
That's a really powerful question. What becomes possible then?
Yeah.
Okay. And just to add, if these struggles feel really big, if they're seriously impacting your life or causing a lot of distress, the sources do mention that reaching out for professional support is a really valid and often effective step.
Absolutely. Talking to your doctor, looking into mental health resources, finding a therapist. There are people and structured approaches designed specifically to help you work through these things.